If I could go back in time and learn Korean from the very beginning, knowing everything that I know now, I would be able to learn a lot faster, a lot easier, and with a lot less frustrations along the way. The problem is that I made so many mistakes on how I approached learning Korean along the way. And I spent too much time on methods that didn't really work all that well. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the things that I would do to learn Korean if I had to start over. So the very first thing that I would do is I would learn Hangeul, which is the Korean alphabet. And while I'm learning the alphabet, I would also make sure that I'm using some sort of audio resource so that I can listen to how the sounds of the alphabet should sound, and giving myself a lot of exposure to that, and also just trying to copy it, trying to shadow the consonant sounds, shadow the vowel sounds, and try to really mimic them myself. Especially because Korea has a lot of consonants and a lot of vowels that sound very similar, and it's really hard for people to pronounce them when they're first learning Korean. And it can also be really hard for people when listening to things to be able to tell them apart. So what I would do really early on is I would listen a lot to those sounds because I would want to give myself the opportunity to start to discern the differences from the sounds that sound very similar. Because a big mistake that I made, and I think a lot of people make, is that we feel the Korean alphabet is very easy to learn. You can learn it in a day, and so you think, I've learned it, I can write it, I'm good. But I think the problem is that we learn to write it, but we don't really learn the sounds in one day. And if you don't spend enough time, in my opinion, trying to build up like audio component, that's going to carry over into your studies, and it's going to be really hard for you to communicate and to learn. And so I think just spending a little bit of time to focus on those sounds in the very beginning before you dive into your studies is going to do a lot of good in the long run. And then after learning the Korean alphabet, I would focus really hard on pronunciation. And basically one of the go-to ways that I would do this is I would spend a lot of time trying to listen to music in Korean. Or maybe I would watch like a few minutes of like a Netflix show and put on the Korean subtitles and just try to read along the Korean. Now, I wouldn't worry about if I could understand the song or if I could understand what's being said in the show. I would be focusing on listening to the Korean while seeing the words and following along with the words. I wouldn't necessarily be reading aloud. I would just be following along with my eyes. And there's a really big reason why I would do this. It's because when you're looking at the words and you're listening to someone singing them or speaking them, it is giving your brain information on what those words represent, what sounds they represent. And this is also doing a really important thing for me. It's helping me build my decoding skills, which is my ability to translate what I read into sounds. And this is actually a foundational building block for being able to read. If you have high decoding skills, so you can easily read something and understand the sounds that it represents, then you are able to read very comfortably with a low cognitive load. So basically, if you have low decoding skills, when you go to read something, you might be able to read, but it's going to feel very difficult and tiring. Whereas if you have higher decoding skills, when you go to read something, it's going to be very easy for you to read without having to use so much brain power. And so that's why I would focus on the pronunciation without worrying so much about what things mean. I just want to have that foundation of knowing how the language should sound. Even if I can't produce the sounds perfectly myself yet, I want to have that ability to know how things are supposed to sound, because that will make learning the language and learning new words and things along the way so much easier. And that's why I don't really care if I understand the song or I understand the Korean show that I'm watching, because at this stage, my goal isn't comprehension. And essentially by building this decoding skill, I could get really good at reading in Korean, but not really knowing what I'm saying, but sounding pretty good pronunciation-wise. And then your ability to read the language as you go will be a lot easier, and it will also come with a lot less mental fatigue. Now, there's so many resources out there these days to learn Korean, but I know that if I was starting from scratch tomorrow, there's two specific resources that I would use, and I feel pretty strongly about them. So first, I would use Ewha University's Korean textbook series, and then I would use Yonsei University's reading series. Now, the Ewha University textbooks, there's a textbook, a workbook, and a guide. And the guide you can get in English, whereas the textbook and the workbook are in Korean. And the guide is just there to serve like extra information about the grammar or like concepts that you might not totally understand. It clarifies that for you in English. And so I think because the textbooks, in my opinion, are structured really nicely, and because that guide exists, I think even though this textbook is obviously designed for university students, like people going to classes, I think it makes a really great package deal for someone who wants to self-learn Korean. Now, the Yonsei University reading textbooks, the reason I would want to use those is because they're essentially leveled readers. And what I like about them is even at the intermediate and advanced levels, the maximum pages that a passage could be is just 2 to 3 pages. And then each book has 30 passages in it. And so it's nice because there's a lot of passages, but each individual passage is short enough that you can really sit down and intensely study them. But the really nice thing about it is that it also comes with audio, so not only do you get to read the passages, but you can also listen to them as well. And so what I really like about the reading series is that you can start reading in Korean from the very beginning. Then you can use the audio to develop listening practice, and then you can use the combination of the book and the audio to shadow. So for me personally, I would just be going through the Ewha textbook as a way to learn new concepts in Korean, while also reading, listening, and shadowing the reading textbooks to give myself a lot more input practice as well. Okay, and if you follow my channel or if you've seen some of my videos before, then it's not going to be surprised to you that I'm also going to be mentioning shadowing. If I had to learn Korean again, I would be making sure that I was shadowing a lot. Long before I tried to speak to people in Korean, I would be shadowing my little heart out. Shadowing builds on that ability to read and associate the words and phrases with the correct sound, with the added experience of mimicking. By mimicking what you hear, it's giving your mouth and your muscles the ability to practice creating those sounds yourself, but it forces you to listen more closely to what you're hearing so that you can pick out more of the details in order to copy them better. Sometimes I feel when I'm shadowing something versus when I'm listening to it, I'm actually getting better listening practice than when I'm just listening to something. It's like there's a lot of details that go into speaking that we don't always pay attention to when we're listening. And because the sounds of the Korean language can be very difficult for a lot of us to pronounce, it's also just really important to keep creating opportunities for you to practice making those sounds yourself, especially to pick out the intonation, to listen to how the voice goes up and down throughout sentences and phrases, because in Korean that intonation is very rigid and very important for people to understand what you're saying. And so by shadowing, you can really quickly start to pick out that intonation and copy it without having to worry about making your own ideas and expressing yourself and creating your own sentences. So if I had to start over with Korean, I would use the Yonsei reading textbook series and I would just shadow each passage very intently. That way I would be picking up on new grammar and new words as I go. Another thing that I would do is I would use social media. I would just go onto TikTok or Instagram and like go into the search bar and just type in Korean words, like any Korean words that I know, like maybe cafe, maybe soul. I would just type something in and I would scroll through the videos that come up and I would just spend my time trying to understand what I could in the videos. And if there were videos where I felt like, oh wow, like I understood quite a bit here, or oh, I kind of understood just like maybe one sentence, but woohoo, that one sentence. Or maybe some videos just seemed like really funny to me, or maybe I didn't really understand what they were saying, but because of the context, I understood what was going on. I would like those videos. Anything that just jumped out at me or seemed interesting, I would make sure to like it, because by doing this, my algorithm learns, oh, Sarah wants to see videos in Korean. And then based on what I actually liked, it will also obviously think about what kind of videos I would want to see in Korean. And then my algorithm will start showing me Korean videos in my feed when I'm not looking for them. And then whenever I'm bored and I'm on social media, like I might spend a couple minutes just watching a couple random videos in Korean and just getting some exposure to the language and trying to see what I can understand. Like worst case scenario, I don't understand anything, but best case scenario, I realize like, oh hey, I kind of understand that sentence, and then I pat myself on the back. But as I keep studying the language, every time I go on social media and I look at these videos, there's an increased chance that I'm going to understand more, or there's going to be words that I learned recently or grammar I learned recently that these videos come up and I watch them and I'm like, oh hey, like aha, like I learned that the other day. I find it's really nice to have these videos coming up in my feed because sometimes when you're learning a language, when you're at home and you're nowhere near anyone who speaks the language, you can sometimes feel very detached from that language and from that world. And so by putting Korean videos in my feed, I start to feel like there's Korean around me and it becomes more part of my environment. And then that creates more motivation to want to learn and keep using Korean because it's showing up in my feed every day. Now, something else that I personally would do is I would be using Duolingo casually alongside my studies. I know everyone has a very strong opinion about this, but I will stick to my Duolingo. I like Duolingo because it really helps me solidify grammar that I've already learned, and it really gives a boost to my vocabulary. And Duolingo is just really easy and simple to use because it functions like a game, and it's very easy to spend 5-10 minutes of my day getting onto Duolingo and just going through like a lesson or two. Now, I wouldn't actually like only use Duolingo. I wouldn't rely on it to teach me all of my Korean, but I do feel like using it on top of all my studies is like icing on the cake. I just find that whenever I use Duolingo when I'm learning languages, it really helps me with my vocabulary. And because I do listen to the audio and I try to copy it, it does help me a little bit with pronunciation too. If I had used Duolingo when I started learning Korean, I think a lot of the vocabulary that I was learning would have stuck in my brain a lot faster if I had used Duolingo. Eventually, after I made some progress in my textbooks and I was getting into a rhythm with my studies, the next thing that I would do is I would hire a tutor. And I would primarily be using my tutor for speaking practice because the only way to get better at speaking Korean would be to speak Korean. And this is going to depend on you and your circumstances. Like, if you're someone who happens to be in Korea, maybe you would go out into Korea and try to use your Korean. Or, if you're not in Korea, which I guess a lot of you aren't, you might want to go online and find a language partner or a tutor, or maybe you have a friend or family member that you could practice with. So if I was learning Korean over, my point is I would find somewhere or someone to practice speaking with consistently. And if I had absolutely no one around me, I would be hiring a tutor online to be that person for me. I personally would probably want to focus on my pronunciation and my studying and shadowing for like at least a month or two before I hire a tutor, because I would want to be able to have some basic pronunciation down, simple expressions, words, some basic grammar so that I have something to start with the tutor. But I do want to make sure that I'm starting with a tutor as soon as possible because I want to get feedback on my pronunciation, my intonation, my sentence structure, because I want to just make sure that I'm building all of these skills, but then at the same time, I'm not fossilizing any of my mistakes too. And you may have noticed by now that I haven't really discussed any sort of dedicated vocabulary studies or flashcards so far in this video. And that's because honestly, I don't really spend any particular amount of time trying to cram vocabulary, and I wouldn't use flashcards to learn Korean. And if you're curious to know why, then I highly recommend checking out this video where I explain why I don't use flashcards.